What is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here, and welcome once again to the Nebula Music Podcast. This is a show where I talk to some of today's most inspiring musicians with the goal of exploring their mindset and hopefully be able to understand what drives their passion. Today I'm very excited because I have Mr. Tarek, lead singer and guitarist for the band The Bluestones, joining me for a very, very cool conversation. Now, if you guys have not heard of them, let me just tell you real quick. The Bluestones are a band that you need to tune into right away. Not only is their music super cool and super refreshing, but they're one of the top rising bands coming out of Canada right now. And I'm pretty sure they're going to be really, really huge sooner than anyone anticipates. I got a chance to talk to Tarek about their music, where their influences come from, and where their music is hopefully going to go from here. But also, we had a very interesting conversation about being a musician that's self-taught and what are some of the pros and cons of being self-taught versus having a formal musical education. But when we had the conversation, he was just telling me some of the challenges that he went through as he was teaching himself, and even some of the doubts that went through his brain when he was learning how to play this guitar and pursuing music for the first time. And I think it's a very important conversation to have because whether you're trained or not, most musicians, I believe, go through this thought process at some point. Is it better to have your skill level refined, or is it better to have it raw? And it's a question that I don't think has a very specific answer, and it's unique to everybody. And definitely, it's a conversation worth having, especially with how many musicians now are inspired to pursue their passion. I think it's important now more than ever to be able to reassure ourselves of those values and be able to understand what we value more, because I don't think either one is better than the other. Anyways, rather than bore you with all these details, I do believe Tarek had some very wise words to say, and I was very much blown away with our conversation and his philosophy when it comes to playing music. And so I don't want to waste any more time, so let's just go ahead and dive right into the conversation. What is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here again, your favorite host of the Nebula Music Podcast, bringing you something really, really cool today. And I know I say that a lot, but that's because I pride myself in only bringing you guys really cool musicians that I would listen to, and I want to make sure that I talk to them. And I have someone very special. When I was introduced to his music and some of the stuff that they were doing, I was refreshed because it reminded me a lot of artists that I've heard recently, but it has interesting twists, new takes on it, and I can definitely see this band going very, very far. I have Mr. Tarek Jafar of the Bluestones joining me. How are you, Tarek?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Eddie.
Of course, man. Was that a good enough intro for you? Did I hype you up enough?
Yeah, super hyped. So I better live up to this.
You know what? I feel like I never hype enough. You know what I mean? Every time I talk to somebody really cool, I feel like afterwards, I'm like, damn, I should have said this and that because they're just so much cooler than I made them out to be. Not saying I didn't make you seem cool, but you're definitely a very talented guy.
The only thing you left out were the club horns, which I would have really liked. Like, it would have been kind of cool.
You know what? I'm going to add those just for you. I'm going to add those.
Oh, I would love that.
My man Tarek, dude, why don't we just go ahead and, like we always do, I love to kind of dive into your backstory just a little bit, kind of get to know where you're from and sort of how you got into music, and then we'll sort of go from there.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I'm from a place called Windsor, Ontario, which is in Canada. It's actually very, very southern. Well, I mean, we say southern, but it's very southern Canada. It's right across the border from Detroit, Michigan. So just naturally, very Americanized here in this city. But it's where I grew up, and it's where obviously I started falling in love with music. I played at a very young, I don't want to say very young age. My mom would teach me piano when I was 6 or 7 onwards until I was 11. But then I told her, like, listen, I want to play the electric guitar. So I took a few lessons, didn't really like the getting taught guitar. And I just remember I ended up just looking up how to play songs online, like just with tablature. And I would just play the songs that I really wanted to play. And then from there, I just kind of mess around on my own, and I sort of just built a knack for playing guitar that way, rather than being classically trained or going to school for it per se. So
What was it that you didn't like about being taught? I'm curious about that.
There's a few things. Like I remember going in week to week, and like I'd go in and the teacher would be like, okay, well, what song do you want to learn this week? And then I would tell him a song that I wanted to learn, and he would teach me. And he's like, okay, go home or learn it, and the next week we'll do another song. And I was like, okay, well, this is guitar lessons. And I was like, I can do this. I wasn't even really that old, and I was like, I can do this. Like, forget this. So it was that, and then also I don't know. I just kind of felt like I wanted to do it on my own time anyway. And I hated having to go to like an appointment to do something.
So it wasn't necessarily what you were learning then. Were you at least learning what you wanted to, or was it a little bit of both?
It was the same, like any kid who's taking electric guitar lessons, like they would learn the same songs like Brain Stew and Smoke on the Water and stuff like that. And then obviously you're a kid and you don't really understand guitar and you want to learn like a Jimi Hendrix song.
Of course.
And they look at you like, you're an idiot. You want to play like Jimi Hendrix right now. But yeah, I don't know. This wasn't really my thing, I guess. It's not that I really gave up on guitar. I just gave up on the lessons.
Got it. All right. So then you didn't like the lessons and then you started teaching yourself online, like through YouTube and stuff.
Yeah. Well, it was mainly through like, I would listen to a lot of music even as a kid, and I would be like, oh, like I really want to know how to play that song. So I would look it up online. I remember guitartabs.com, and I just look up how to play the song based off of like the tabs, which is basically they assign a number to each string. And that way you learn how to like place your finger on the fretboard and you learn how to play a song. Yeah. So that's how I would learn how to play the songs I really liked. That's how I learned to play the blues scale. And then from there, it sort of took off.
The classic blues scale. That's like that's for those of you guys who might not know. I feel like most of you guys might know what the blues scale is, but it's one of the classic formations of notes that you can use to solo over certain things, especially if you know how to do it. I feel like it's used in a lot of jazz, but most people use it for almost everything. And that and the pentatonic scale too. I'm not a guitarist. I just kind of sort of know these things. I'm a drummer.
Okay.
So
you pretty much got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea. I mean, I kind of know some of the notes. But what's interesting about your story so far is that I sort of relate a little bit. Growing up, I got lessons on, classical piano and all of that, and I didn't like it. I absolutely hated it. Then my teacher showed me how to play a little bit of jazz stuff, and that I absolutely loved. And then later on, I taught myself how to do it. I just basically how to teach myself, and that's kind of how I became a drummer. What I find fascinating about that is I feel like there's a big difference in personality. You know what I mean? Like there's definitely those that seek out that structure, that they need that A, B, C, D, E, F, G that's led by somebody. And then there are those who seems like you're one of those and it seems like I'm one of those who kind of prefer just to venture off into the wilderness, so to speak, and just figure it out on your own. You know what I mean? Do you feel like that's kind of you with everything that you do?
With everything, I guess I feel like, I don't know, I'm not really afraid to kind of make mistakes just because I know that no matter what, I'll kind of learn from it. So rather than like sit there and have to watch like a YouTube video that's a really long video or sit there and read through something, like I'm very, honestly, to a fault, I'm very impatient. I'd rather just get in and try and figure it out. And if I screw up, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do this differently or I'll do this differently. And that's just kind of like how I figure out how to do things, I suppose.
Yeah. You never felt like you weren't doing it right, though?
Oh, playing guitar? Yeah. Oh, my God. I definitely was doing it wrong. I mean, it's funny because, like, even I think like a very skilled and talented guitar player who would watch me on stage would, like, look at the way, like, watch my technique. And they would be like, look at this guy's, mangy, skeleton-y fingers in this improper technique, slamming them down on the fretboard. Like, they would definitely call me out on my technique on how to play, but it's just kind of like how I learned to play the guitar. Yeah. It's wrong for sure, but I don't know, it works. So that's how I do it.
Do you still play that way?
Yeah, I think I play the wrong way. I'm pretty sure. Like, I'd like to sit in front of like somebody like Gary Clark Jr. and be like, well, here, play a song, and then him watch me, and then like just see the look on his face, like, what is this guy doing? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he'd be like, look at this guy's technique, it sucks. but whatever, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I don't know. I don't mean to pick on this quite a bit, but it just kind of, it piques my curiosity a little bit because lately I've been talking to a lot of different musicians, and for whatever reason, I've been talking to like a split 50-50, some trained, some not. And I constantly see this sort of weird gray area that comes with the philosophy of it all. There's some that really appreciate, and like I said earlier, they definitely hold the traditional schooled musician to a high pedigree. But then on the flip side, there's this kind of movement now where, because of YouTube and because of the accessibility of knowledge, there's so many people that kind of prefer, and again, they hold to a pedestal, this sort of nomad that can kind of teach themselves anything. And even if they teach themselves a quote unquote bad technique, as long as it works, they kind of appreciate that. It's interesting for me that you're saying all this because your music is incredible. And I get a lot of like bluesy black keys and a lot of modern takes to that in your style, which is not easy to replicate. And so part of me wonders if maybe, just maybe, I don't know, I could be wrong, but what if your style and your music arose because of that? You know what I mean? Like, because you were a bit of a nomad in that sense, where you taught yourself and you kind of found your way here. Your technique may not be what is ideal, but somehow that helps you create the style that you're currently doing. Does that sort of make sense, what I'm saying?
I think it definitely makes sense. Like I believe, and I actually hope that just the way that I learned to piece together music and write music and play the guitar, or play the piano, whatever I'm doing, I hope that sort of lends itself to the individuality of music, right? And I think it does. And I think it's like, I remember I was reading this story about like this guy, it was like a studio tech who was really preparing for Elton John to come in and play the piano that was in his studio. And so this guy's freaking out, obviously, you know, granted he's trying to make sure the piano sounds perfect. He's setting up these microphones in all these different ways. He's testing the piano, making sure it's in tune. But for whatever reason, like, he couldn't get the piano to sound the way that it did when Elton would play it on his records. And he kept trying to change things, but he started freaking out. He couldn't get it ready. So then finally Elton John shows up to the studio and he, you know, takes a look at the piano. He sits down, he starts playing it. The studio tech is like, you know, he's basically freaking out in the background, and he starts playing, and automatically it sounds exactly like Elton John because it's him playing the instrument, right?
Yeah.
That was the factor that was missing. You're missing the player. So I just feel like, you know, whatever way Elton learned how to play the piano, whatever way Jimmy learned how to play the guitar, it's just like that is going to lend itself to the individuality of your sound. And I hope the way that I learned to pick up the guitar, people could hear a riff that I play or a couple notes that I play and automatically think like, oh, that's Tarek. Like, I know that's just the way he plays.
Yeah.
So yeah, whether the technique's right or wrong, honestly, it doesn't matter. If you like the music, that's it.
Do you think that, and I'm glad you say that because I legitimately believe in what you just said. I think at the end of the day, what matters is music and how it connects everybody. That's always going to come first over anything. But using that Elton John example, you're absolutely right. I feel like the legends that we all admire, for the most part, all have their own unique takes to their instruments, right? Or their craft, or whatever it is that we're talking about. And there comes a point where critics, you know, or people that are sort of more in the academic world will look at somebody who's a legend and criticize their technique and be like, well, he didn't learn it right and he doesn't play it right, but he's Elton John, so, you know, it's sort of a pass. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so my question is, how would you, because it sounds to me like you are very objective with the way you play. You understand that you learned your own way, but you're sort of open to more experiences and to see where your guitar playing goes. Do you ever fear that if you were to learn the right technique, quote unquote, whatever that is, that you might lose a little bit of what makes you unique? Or do you feel like it would enhance it more?
Yeah, I think at this point, you know, maybe a little bit earlier on, it could have done that. But I think at this point, that style is sort of ingrained in the way that I play. So anything else that I learn, I think will just enhance the way that I play. So I'm kind of eager to learn new things and new techniques. And then especially because of what I got to do live, like, you know, I got to play these songs. It's just a duo, right? So
yeah, just you and a drummer, right?
It's just myself and Justin, right? We're the Blue Stones. So I've got to play the music on the guitar and sing at the same time. So like, there's a lot going on. for me to hold down a melody and hold down some riffs and then play a little bit of lead, play a little bit of rhythm. So really any technique that makes it easier for me to do that will just lend itself to a better performance. So yeah, I'm eager to learn proper techniques because now it's not about, you know, even writing music anymore. It's about like functionality and efficiency when you're up on stage because you get up there, you playing 90-minute sets, 2-hour sets, like, you gotta be ready. It's a very physical thing. So
It is.
anything that will help me do that, I'm definitely eager to learn that.
And then you got to do that again the next day and then the next day, especially
The
when you're on
next day,
tour.
the next day, absolutely, absolutely. It's so much of being like a musician or like a professional touring musician. There's a lot about creating and writing and performing, but then there's a lot about like preserving yourself too. I think a lot of people don't really think about the actual toll that it takes on you physically and mentally,
Yeah.
especially musicians like us. Like we're very energetic and very active up on stage. And like when you're doing that night after night, man, you got to learn how to take care of yourself, just to be able to do it. Like you have to learn how to take care of yourself. So really it's about pacing and doing things the right way just to preserve your body rather than, make it sound good.
Yeah. How crazy. It's interesting that you say that because I was just watching this video. I can't remember who produced it. I think it might have been Vice or Vox, but it was a video I was watching online and it was about this really famous vocal coach, but I guess she's famous in the opera world. Anyways, this video was about how she sort of became the vocal coach for all of the hardcore screamo heavy metal, not heavy metal, but like the modern day screaming bands, right? And it had people on there like Caleb from Bare Hands and other famous like bands in that world that they have to scream in the performances quite a bit, and it shows how this lady sort of became the go-to person. She saw a need in this industry of people that were screamers and how they should do it properly because they were destroying their voices because nobody taught them how to do it properly. And here's this random operatic teacher who comes in and teaches all these screamo bands how to scream properly so that they don't destroy their vocal cords. So I bring this up because this is sort of a challenge I went through years ago. And I see this with a lot of young musicians coming up and artists in general, not just even musicians, just anyone who does art in general. There's sort of this romanticization of suffering, the suffering and the struggle that it takes to create art. And that can be defined in many different ways. But for musicians, I feel like now because there is this sort of movement of teaching yourself and that sort of raw talent that comes from just teaching yourself, there's this sort of appreciation and sort of push to push your body to limits that you normally wouldn't if you were trained, And so you seem to be you seem to make these decisions very easily. You know what I mean? Like you taught yourself, you were cool with your style, and now you're sort of in a different state. And so you're very much willing to accept that you need to learn some things to help you perform better. But I've met other people that don't do that by choice. And so I'm curious, why do you feel like you made those choices? I mean, do you feel like in your life you're able to transition and adapt pretty easily? Like maybe that's why? Or is there another reason why you feel like you're able to accept these transitions and mindsets and all that as your career expands? I know it's a mouthful, but
Yeah,
I'm generally curious.
I guess I try to just stay open-minded with things. I think it would be really dumb of me if I was like stubborn and refused to learn anything new, especially if that thing could make me better as a musician overall and improve the music that I make. But yeah, I try to keep an open mind, and I do feel like I can adapt pretty well to things.
Yeah.
If like there's a change that's got to be made, it might seem hard at first, but after a while, you kind of get used to it, and you just roll with it pretty much. Yeah, I'm trying to answer the question, but to be honest, I'm trying to remember what the question was. It was a lot there.
The question was basically that you seem to adapt pretty easily. And I was curious if that's just your personality or if you sort of learned that from something else.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't really like to dwell on how things used to be if they're changed. Like it's just whatever. Let's just roll with it. Yeah, I think I adapt fairly well to new situations. Obviously, there's some things that I have a hard time shaking off. Like, for example, like if I really have a hard time, like if I feel I played a bad show, that will stick with me for a while. It's just hard to get out there and feel like I disappointed, I disappointed people. That's one hard thing for me to shake. But otherwise, yeah, I think I'm pretty easygoing. And when it comes to, if it's going to make me better, I'll do it pretty much.
Interesting. Why do you think it's hard to feel that way? I mean, I feel like that's a pretty generic question because nobody likes to disappoint
Yeah,
people,
of
but
course.
especially in music, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's a very relatable feeling that almost anyone who's been in a band has felt at some point, multiple
I don't know.
times, I would argue.
I feel like Justin is really good at, if somehow we play a bad show, like even if he thinks that he didn't perform well, like he's really good at just being like, oh, well, you know what? It's done. Let's just move on to the next one. Whereas for me, like I'll just sit there and be like, wow, like why, what? I really don't feel good about it. And it'll last for a couple hours. Eventually I'll get over it, but I don't know. I just feel like every time I get out there, I am pretty hard on myself as far as like making sure everything sounds exactly how I think it should. And when it doesn't, I don't know. I just feel like I kind of let people down who paid to come see this show or who were really looking forward to seeing us live. And then I didn't give them the best show that I possibly could. So that probably is the reason why. But again, it's silly because everybody makes mistakes and everybody has good shows and bad shows. So
Well, of course.
it's
Is
the
it
way it's
rare?
going to go.
Do you feel like having bad shows are less common? I would imagine
Well,
so, but I'm
you
curious.
know what's funny? There's a difference between what we think a bad show is and what the audience thinks a bad
How
show
true,
is.
very true.
It's so weird. Like we could go up there and just in our minds just bomb. Like Justin will be like, "Man, I missed like 4 snare hits and I my kick drum pedal fell out." And like I'll be there, I'll be like, "My pedal completely blew. I couldn't even play this part." But then you see people afterwards, you talk to them at the merch purple, whatever, and they're like, "Oh my God, you guys blew my mind." And I'm just sitting there like, really? Like, you have no idea what we went through up there. Yeah. But it really is a difference. And you have to try to remind yourself, like to you, you've played whatever songs you're playing, 1,000 times, even more. And to somebody who's hearing you for the first time, like you might think you're playing it at maybe 70% of the quality that it should be, but to them, it's like, wow, this is amazing. It's the first time I've heard this live and I love it. So that's one thing that I sort of helps me get over it, I guess.
Yeah. Do you feel like that should be, I guess the question then there would be, do you feel like that is a balance that every band or every leader or basically anyone who's going to go on stage should strive for? Because as you described, it happens quite a bit. And more often than not, anybody who's sitting in the audience doesn't notice half of the things. Unless they were with you at all the rehearsals and they know the show forwards, backwards, and everything. Statistically, nobody should really know everything that you're going to do at the show, only who's on stage, right? But it happens all the time. I mean, it happens to me all the time where you miss one downbeat or one hit, or maybe you come in too early or whatever. No one usually cares. Very few times has someone actually come up to be like, hey, I noticed you didn't hit that hi-hat that one time. But
yeah, could you imagine? Yeah.
Can you imagine, dude? I was listening to Conan O'Brien. He was talking about this show he was doing. Was it Conan? It might have been somebody, it might have been another actor. Regardless, though, they were talking about a show that they had been doing a long time ago when they first started. And then now that their career is sort of, now that they're big stars, these people come up to them and they're like, oh my God, like I was such a huge fan of that show you did like 20 years ago. I watched it every day, blah, 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 blah. And the actor who was talking was sort of reflecting on like, wow, like I thought I did a shitty ass job. Like every day I was hanging by a thread. I didn't know if I was good or not. And now I'm older and I'm seeing that literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of people thought I was the greatest. And it's like interesting when you see that in retrospective. What do you think? I mean, do you think that would harm your growth as an artist if you allowed yourself to believe that? You know what I mean? Like to fully embrace that. Yes, I didn't do a good enough job today, but hey, nobody else noticed, so fuck it. Do you think that is a good or bad thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think I think it's a bad thing personally. I feel like, I don't know, I'll probably get a lot of pushback on this, but it's okay to let things go and you should let things go. Like you can't let things, ruin your life, especially if they're, super small or if you're being like an excessive defeatist. You can't be doing that. You're just going to end up, never wanting to play again. But at the same time, like, I don't think you should ever feel like you're good enough.
Interesting.
That's really tough to say.
No. Say it, dude. Say it.
Not even that. I don't think you should ever feel. I should correct that. I don't think that you should ever feel like you're done. You know,
Interesting.
I don't think you should ever get to that point. You shouldn't feel comfortable and be like, yeah, you know what? I've done enough and I'm good. I'm a good enough guitar player. I'm a good enough songwriter. I'm done. And it's just, I feel like you kind of limit yourself. I feel like you need to be humbled sometimes, like you need an amplifier to blow on stage and
Yeah.
learn how to roll with that situation and adapt to whatever's happening to be a better performer overall. I feel like you need those humbling experiences to then become better from them. I feel like if you get comfortable with your craft, I don't know, it should be almost like a constant pursuit of challenges. And those things, live performance in general, is a challenge because you never really know what's going to expect. Like so many things could go wrong. You have to be prepared how to handle them. And if you are, you're already a better music player. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it's a good thing. I think I think it's a bad thing to get used to that. I think you should always stay a little bit frosty when it comes to that.
I I agree with you. And here's what I'm curious about, where my mind kind of goes. This is more of a philosophical question. I'm not sure we'll have an answer, but do you feel like it's possible to ever feel like you're done? Not saying that whether you should or not, but do you ever feel like as an artist, like maybe the goal when you're older to get to a point where like, yeah, I did everything I did. You don't feel like that would be an ideal place to get to? Do you feel like legendary artists ever get to that point? And this is again just philosophical, subjective questions, but for you,
Right.
I'm
Right.
curious, like, do you ever feel like, would that be an ideal situation for you? Like maybe 50 years from now, you did everything you wanted and you finally got to a point where like, you know what? I'm good. I'm done learning and growing as a guitarist, onto other things. Do
Yeah.
you foresee that at all?
I hope that's what happens. Honestly, I think there's definitely a few ways that it could end up, and I think one of the ways is you feel content with all the music you've made, and you're like, yeah, you know what, I'm happy. I don't really feel like I need to change all that much. I've already achieved a lot of things that I wanted to achieve. I'm just going to sit back and play the songs that my millions of fans are already used to, and I don't really have to change very much. And I think that's totally cool. But then I also think there's other legendary artists who like are constantly trying to push themselves into new
True.
directions,
That's also true.
right? So you get a little bit of both. Um, I don't know. For me, I feel like after a while, if I kept pushing myself the way I do with music right now, I'd probably just burn out. So
Really?
yeah, hopefully there's a little light at the end of the tunnel where I can be like, yeah, we have a nice catalog of music. We have a beautiful sort of group of fans, and we're good. We're content with that.
So your goal is essentially to kind of reach this point where you've said what you've needed to say and you've changed what you needed to change and you've left a mark, and then at that point you'll leave it open to see what you got to do after that. But so
Yeah.
you don't feel like this never-ending chase of never being done is your path, is what I'm
Well,
getting at.
I think at that point it would be, what's the next challenge? Like, what's the next thing I want to do? So I always see myself as having a career in music, and obviously becoming as successful as we possibly can, and enjoying a really nice career in music, and then from there moving on to something like production. Like I
Yeah.
mean, the guy that we're working with right now, Paul. He's
Yeah, Paul
he
Meany,
had
right?
Paul Meany. Yeah, he had an amazing run. Man, he's been like a absolute hero of mine since I was young. Like since Mutemath put out their first album, I was listening to Mutemath. I remember hearing him on the radio and like, instantly falling in love. And I just became a diehard fan of theirs, and I listened to their music, my entire life, pretty much. Um, but Paul had this amazing career where he had a band, and he built up a nice dedicated fan base, and it sort of came to a point where he moved on from Mute Math exclusively to delve into production a little bit more.
Hmm.
And that was his next challenge. He moved on to producing younger artists and producing newer albums that he could still leave his mark on, but in a very different way. But that was still very iconic to his sound. I remember listening to that album, 21 Pilots' album Trench,
Yeah.
and this was before I even knew that Paul had produced, or at least lent his hand on many of the tracks producing the album. I remember hearing it's kind of like a piano lick in the background. I was like, wow, that really sounds like a Paul Meany sound. Like that sounds like a Mute Math thing. And then I remember looking it up on Wiki and seeing that he produced it. And I was like, oh my God, there it is. So like, it's just a really nice testament to having been a musician and having his own sound, an original sound while he was performing live, and then moving on to the next thing, which was production for him, and still leaving his mark in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Kind of passed it down. So I thought that was really, really great. And I mean, just the fact that I've been a fan of this guy and the band for my whole life, and then finally gets to a point where he's producing our stuff. Like it's absolutely surreal, man. I can't believe it.
I can only imagine how surreal that must feel, man. What's it like on like day to day that you're working with him?
Well, the way I like to describe the experience is like, the phrase, don't meet your heroes. You ever hear that?
Oh, all the time. I always hear that.
Okay. He's like the opposite of whatever that phrase is.
Really?
Honestly, he's the guy where like, obviously a hero of mine and Justin's, and we finally meet him. The most humble, nicest man, really great coach, amazing producer. He's very easy to work with. All around, just a great guy, amazing musician, amazing coach. It's really been a great experience, and it's just like, Mutemath is one of our influences, right? That was one of the bands that we listened to religiously when we were developing our own band and our own sound. And it's just kind of cool to get to a point now where one of your influences is there in the room with you, and now you get to work with them. So you get to like almost double down on who you are as a band, because now one of your influences is helping you work on an album. So it's just a really, really awesome experience.
God damn, man, you're making me so jealous right now in a good way.
Sorry.
No, nothing
true.
to apologize for. And it sounds like it's an experience that is well earned. What I'm curious about is were there any lessons that you learned right off the back going in and working with him? Like maybe some stuff that you thought, like an approach to your own music that you thought was rad, and then maybe he had different ideas and he helped you think of it in a different way that made you feel like, oh my God, I totally see it now. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, definitely. There's two things that immediately pop into my head when you ask me that question. So number one, like on previous things that I've written, I never really, and I say this very lightly because there are definitely some songs that mean a lot to me on like our original material that was produced by us, like Black Holes, for example, like
great
lyrics
track,
in that song.
Great track.
Thank you. But the lyrics specifically, they mean a lot to like how we were feeling at the time and the emotion. Like that content is really a snapshot of how I felt at the time. But Paul kind of made me see a lot more how important lyrics were in a song, and telling a story and like connecting with somebody on a level that's more than just what you hear musically, but like what you're saying. Because before, I would always write a song where I would write the music first, and I'd write like a really catchy riff or just something that I was playing around with that was very pleasing to the ear. And we'd add a beat to it, and then it would become this song. And once it was sort of built already, then I would just kind of like hum over it and attach lyrics loosely to the song. Sometimes it became something that I wrote that was really meaningful. And sometimes it was just kind of a fun song where the lyrics didn't really mean that much, but they didn't have to. But I think in this newer stuff, as we evolved as musicians, as we started to work with Paul, he really showed me the importance of lyrics and how you can connect with somebody and how that makes them love the song even more. When they can look at like, what is he saying and why is he saying it? And does it apply to my life? So that was one thing that he taught me, and that kind of changed the way I viewed writing, because I weighted lyrics a lot more heavily now when it comes to writing songs. Apart from that, he also kind of showed me that like you don't really have to have a full song idea before you hit the studio. Honestly, that was something that I believed before, where it's like a song, and I mean it was born out of being independent musicians for so long. Justin and I we did everything ourselves, right? So we had to make sure that everything we did was efficient and cost effective. So part of that was have everything ready before you go into the studio, so you can spend as little money being in there as possible.
Right.
Because you're prepared.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend these long hours and pay these huge bills, because you already know exactly what you're going to track, right? You're basically just doing a carbon copy of whatever demo that you just made at home. But, as you go on further and you get a little bit of like label backing, what have you, you show me that like you can go in with an idea and you can have a writing session with somebody who's not in your band, and they can maybe a song that you didn't think was very, very good ends up being one of your front runners,
Interesting.
and it's amazing what like an afternoon with a song can do to change it, especially when it involves somebody that's coming in with fresh ears and a totally different perspective. So the moral of that story pretty much is, a lot of people write internally within a band. It's definitely worth exploring other people's ears to see what they could lend to your music,
Yeah.
because sometimes they can just show you things that you would have never even pictured, or an arrangement that you never really imagined. And it just makes the song better as a whole. And that's what we're out here to do, man. We're out here to make good songs.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you bring that up because, again, I feel like I keep circling back to this random topic, and it's the thing that keeps popping up in my mind. But I do feel like it rings something that's very true with what you just said. And coming from someone like Paul, who's very experienced, who clearly knows more than you and me combined for years worth of knowledge, it's interesting how much we value sort of this independence that we have as artists. I think it's something that's important, and I think it's good that you went through that. I definitely have gone through that motion as well. But transitioning from doing everything yourself to then being able to be at the studio longer than you need to be, and then working with songwriters to some, and this is just me sort of just kind of playing the devil's advocate a little bit. Excuse me for doing that, but I'm curious about this. For some, that sounds a little bit like selling out, just a tiny bit, okay? But I will say some of the greatest works of art that I have ever heard, ever witnessed, come from that collaboration because, like you said, comes from this unbiased set of ears that comes into a room, looks at what you are, what you have to offer, and they're like, well, here's what I hear. And it causes you to change your view of everything. You know what I mean? And so I guess what I'm curious about is your new music then. How much of it do you feel was influenced or at least changed because you were able to bring in other people and you were able to approach a new type of approach to your music, if that makes sense? How much has it changed for the better?
The thing that makes Paul an amazing producer is his ability to see who we are, what kind of musicians we are, what kind of music we make, and the sound that we're going for. He gets it. He understands it. And he puts just enough of his input in it to still preserve what the Bluestones are, while still bringing us to a newer level when it comes to our music. So I guess what I'm trying to say is his influence is very large to us. But I think when it comes to the listeners who have grown to love our music and what it was on the first album, it's very subtle to them. He's just so good at doing that, because he's like, people will listen to it, they'll listen to these new songs. And, when we get feedback, they're like, man, this is like, it's so awesome and fresh and new, but it's still you guys. I don't feel like I've lost a piece of that. And I think that's what makes him so amazing. He added just enough to enhance the music rather than change it completely. And I think that's what makes the team of us three, myself, Justin, and Paul working together so amazing, is because we can still produce Bluestones music while having that new edge and that fresh sort of sound to it.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Do you feel like most artists that reach a pinnacle of success, do you feel like they've gone through similar motions? Like it's almost a requirement to be able to go through the independent phase and then go through the phase that you're currently in, where you're bringing other people more experience that have seen more and that are able to preserve what you are and add a little bit of their experience. Do you feel like that whole thing is necessary to becoming not a legend, but, a game changer, I guess is the better term?
I think a long lasting one, or something that's meaningful, just takes a long time, and it does take, you need to feel what it's like to be an independent musician for years. Like you need to sort of feel that to be able to appreciate it.
It builds who you are.
It builds character. Yeah. And it builds your sound too. Like, we played so many shows, and it's amazing. One of the best pieces of advice early on was like another artist that we really enjoy named Sam Roberts, who's a Canadian guy. And I remember we sent him an email just like on a whim, just being like, who knows, he might answer. And he ends up answering. And he's like, we asked him, like, how do you get, we want to advance. Like, how do we do this? And he just said, keep playing shows, man. That's all he said. He was like, you need to keep playing shows. And at first we didn't realize it was so vague, but it makes so much sense now that I look back, because nothing would have ever happened unless we kept playing shows and developing who we were as musicians and hitting the road and building that character. You need to do that. It's like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. I think you're absolutely right. I think it is a bit of a rite of passage. I don't think I know of any band that hasn't gone through that phase. What are some of the things that you were doing early on that you now look back at and we're like, oh shoot, that clearly does not work on stage. I'm so glad I don't do that anymore. Obviously that's a bit of a broad question, but like what are like a couple of those things that you can see now back and forth that are night and day, that are different from how you perform now and how you performed before?
Well, first off, man, the suits. Oh my God, I'm so glad we ditched that.
Wait, this like shirt and tie kind of thing?
Dude, we would play in full suits. I looked like a financial advisor.
Oh man.
Like I'm telling you, it was just our indie band way of trying to brand ourselves. Like, oh, it's like, and it worked. It honestly worked for a long time because we'd play these like 4-band bills and we'd play in these suits, like full suits, sweating our asses off. And then we'd get off stage and people would see us like kind of at the merch table or just kind of in the venue. And they'd be like, oh yeah, you're the guys with the suits. Yeah. Like it was just a way to brand ourselves early on. But I remember when we like signed the first label deal, the first thing they said to us was like, "Okay, guys, welcome aboard. Got to lose the suits."
Straight to the point. Straight to
the point. And I was so happy because man, that is just so impractical, especially touring with suits. Just forget about it. No way. Yeah. So that was one thing. But as far as like musically, I'm trying to think. Like what I would do up on stage?
Just in general. I mean, I feel like the whole motion of being independent versus being backed, and then I feel like what ends up happening is there's definitely a big gap in terms of how you the professionalism that you approach. I think that's a better way of saying it. Whereas before it's sort of not a hobby, but it's it's very playful, I would say, how independent artists approach performing. It's let's just do whatever. But then once you progress and you become more successful, as you have, everything becomes a little bit more professional. You have more intent behind what you're doing, and there's sort of knowledge behind every decision you make. So my question is, musically, is there anything that you can think of at the top of your head that before you would do, that you would play, that was just kind of on a whim, random, whatever, but now do you have a more strategic approach with what you play, if that sort of makes sense?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. Honestly, I feel like we're still that like kind of rambunctious duo that we were when we were playing super, super small clubs in our hometown. I think it's kind of nice to still be like that. Obviously, there's certain things that you learn as far as like, I don't know, I'm trying to say like certain ways that I would put a cable through my pedal board, like there's so many times where I would accidentally kick a patch cord out of a cable and my whole sound would shut down. So I learned to loop it around something and plug it in. It's just like little details, little nuances, or like, the way that I would put a cable into my guitar, you loop it in through your strap and then you plug it in so that you don't accidentally hit it out with your hand. So it's just like little things you pick up from making those mistakes. Like I talked about earlier in the podcast, like you make those mistakes and you sort of learn how to combat them and how to be better the next time you come around, and then also like taking care of my instruments. I think it's really important, especially for guitarists, like when you're done playing, like wipe that guitar down, man, make sure it's good.
That's true.
Before you put it in your case, because like, especially if you're playing show after show, like things can happen. If you don't take care of them, your strings will break or something will go wrong. So taking care of your equipment, that's how you're going to get up there and play every night. So you got to make sure you pay attention to that. And then also things like, I guess I didn't really appreciate preserving my voice as much when I was a younger musician than I do now.
Yeah.
Especially when you're playing show after show after show and singing. Like it's so important to like drink a lot of water and make sure you warm up. And then make sure on off days, you're not like screaming all day or, drinking super heavily before you have to play a show the very next day. Like those sort of things affect your performance.
Yeah.
Sleeping enough, it's just these weird little things that like sound so cliche, but then when you actually practice them, you're like, I feel fucking amazing and I can play an amazing show versus I only had 3 hours of sleep and I drank all night and I smoked and now I can't do anything. So it's just like, take care of yourself. Really, really take care of yourself. If you're trying to take this seriously, you got to take, your body and your mind seriously. I know it sounds super conceited to say this, and it is nowhere near the amount of performance that these guys and girls have to put out. But the way I see it, and it's going to sound ridiculous, but like you almost have to treat yourself like an athlete. You do, man. There is you have to get enough sleep. You have to make sure you're taking care of yourself because you have to get up there and sweat and move every single night, and really push yourself physically. So in a very fraction of the amount, a fraction of what they have to do, you have to treat yourself the same way. So I guess that's one thing that I learned.
What a good analogy, man. I feel like that's definitely something that many people don't think about. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me rephrase that. I feel like the whole rock lifestyle that we think of back in the 80s, I don't meet many musicians that do that as much anymore. At least not a lot of the major touring ones, at least. There's some that still, party really, really hard. But in general, I feel like more and more professional musicians like yourself are adapting a similar lifestyle because you are touring, it's very, very tiring. No one ever tells you that before you do it, but it's very, very tiring.
And then, they made their money off recorded music, right?
True.
Like off CDs and stuff. And that's just not really the case anymore. So you got to tour, right? So you got to tour, you got to play a lot of shows. So it's shifted. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to take care of yourself.
You got to be in tip top shape, man.
Yeah.
Which actually, that brings me to my next question then. Tip top shape, what is shaking off the rust about them? Because we were just talking about Paul, we're talking about all the things that you've learned and you've evolved, and now you're basically prepping to come out with your latest installment of music next year. Or actually, by the time that this comes out, it's going to be already 2020. So it's going to come out this year, 2020. A lot of new music, and I know you already have one song out, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have more than one song out or just one?
Actually, we just put another one out this past Friday.
Oh, got it.
So, yeah, it's called Grim. We put that out online. So, yeah, it's been really great, man. I mean, I'm just so excited to release all this new music. It's been so long since we put out new music. So,
well, talk to me real quick about the difference between. I'm not sure if it's even possible to narrow it down to a brief summary, but you did mention how before Black Holes was, you were at a different place and it was about something else. I'm curious what you feel you're talking about now versus what you were talking about then. Again, broad question, but I'm curious if you feel like there is a very obvious difference between what your message is now in your music versus what it was back then, if that makes sense.
So you're talking about lyrically then?
Yeah, lyrically.
Yeah. I mean, I think before the album that we put out, so Black Holes was about, not really knowing exactly what you wanted to do and not really having confidence in where you were going in your life. The whole album sort of touched on that because we were young and we were fresh out of university and we really didn't know what we wanted to do. We weren't even really sure that any of the music stuff was going to work out and we weren't sure which way to take our careers. So there was a lot of ambiguity and a lot of sort of indecision in that album. And I think that contributed to the sound we did, and obviously to the imagery of being lost in space, but even the sound of having a deep ambient sort of spacey vibe throughout the entire album. This one is a lot more in your face and upfront and edgy. It's years later. We're different guys. We've done this for a while now. We know exactly who we are, exactly what we bring to the table. And I think these songs sort of bring that to life. It's a way of showing everybody this is who we are and we're really not afraid of it. And this is our sound and we want to make you feel as badass as we do. Yeah. So that's the kind of vibe and the energy that we put into these new songs.
God damn, man. I feel that. That confidence coming from you just by hearing you say it. I think, I can definitely tell based on what you've been telling me and your history and the experiences that you've had, you've allowed yourself to grow and you've allowed yourself to adapt. And it seems that now with a little bit of encouragement and outside help and all of these things, you're ready to come out very, very strongly. Not saying that you weren't out strongly before, but I feel like we've been kind of circling around this the whole entire conversation, how it's all part of growing, and when you're younger or when you're inexperienced, everything is new and you're sort of just trying to figure things out, whether it's technique wise, whether it's music wise, blah, blah, blah. But then if you allow yourself to learn, take influence and all this bunch of stuff, I do feel like the natural progression is to become more solid and understand who you are. And that gives you this strength and confidence to be able to come out swinging to the world and just say, hey, here's who we are. Here's our next installment. Here's how we've grown, take it kind of thing, as opposed to just being like, I don't know though. Like, you guys are, it sounds to me like you guys are very excited and very ready. Like, yeah, this is who we are. We're ready to train forward. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. That's how we feel with these new songs. We're just super confident in what we're putting out. And, I'm behind every song that we write and every song that we put out. So I hope that sort of translates to the audience as well. And so far, we've had a pretty good reception from the fans who've been with us since the start. Like I was telling you earlier, people don't really feel like we're missing anything that we used to be. We're just kind of a little bit better of the same version of ourselves. So that's exactly the pocket that we wanted to hit.
I love it, man. And I'm happy for you that you're at this point. Many people struggle to get here, and it seems like you figured it out randomly. And I love that. I love that you adapted so that you could figure it out and get to where you need to be. So let me ask you this real quickly then. So what are your plans, if you have any, for this upcoming year? What are the plans for the Blue Stones right now? Any tour lined up? When is your official release? All that.
So we have a tour that's lined up end of January and runs through February and a bit of March. So we're touring Canada and the US. And then we're also going back into the studio to finish the back end of the album that we're going to be putting out next year. No hard date set on when we're going to release the album. We hope it's going to be spring 2020, but obviously things can change. But that's around the area we'd like to drop it. But we're planning on going back to the studio, touring through January, February, March, and then hitting festival season like we always do, nice and hard, and seeing where we go from there.
Hell yeah, I
brand
love
new
that.
songs in our set, brand new setup with our stage setup. It's things that we're really, really excited to bring to people. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm excited for you. Any notable festival appearances already lined up, or is that still up in the air?
Still up in the air right now, and we can't necessarily say them yet. But when we do announce them, we usually put it through Instagram and our Facebook and our website and all that fun stuff.
Gotcha. My man, I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode. I'm super excited for your career, man. There's nothing else left that I could say. I'm very stoked, and I wish you all the best, my man.
Thanks so much, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tarek. I know that I definitely did. I get excited every time that I have an opportunity to talk to a musician that's wise, that's experienced, and that I truly admire. And Tarek is definitely no exception to that. Based on this conversation, I think most of you guys can definitely see that there is some wisdom with the way that they're approaching their career. There is a lot of wisdom in the way Tarek sees himself and the way he's willing to adapt to situations, to the way his career changes, to advice that's given to him. Personally, growing up, I definitely did not listen to advice very well. That's definitely something I haven't done for a long time. But let me tell you, when I was younger, I definitely did not want to hear what other people had to say about my playing. But I do feel like some of those words of wisdom that I received helped shape the way I play and the musicianship that I developed over the years. And it's something that I don't think is talked about enough in this music industry, is to be able to balance your own self-confidence, but be able to tell when good advice is being given to you. I definitely feel that you can hear it in the Blue Stones' new album. There's definitely a lot of new influences that are being pumped into their music, and I think it's helping them develop as artists. I think it's making them better musicians overall, and I think you can see the progress. So if there's anything to take away from this conversation, I firmly believe it's sort of our responsibility to be able to appreciate ourselves and have confidence in what we're able to do, but to also allow ourselves to balance wisdom to come in from other sources, wisdom that we respect, wisdom that we can identify, wisdom that we can see from a mile away, and recognize that, oh, you know what? They might have a point. I think it's important to be able to do both. Love what you do. Love your own uniqueness and your own approach to music. But if you do feel like it's time to improve, or you do feel like, hey, maybe somebody's words are impacting you in a positive way, there is a big difference between it being positive and it being negative. But trust me, that's a conversation for another time. But if you feel like their words are encouraging you to improve, they're encouraging you to become more powerful and strong in your abilities, then maybe those are wise words that you need to pay attention to. And hey, if you enjoy this conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast. I do this as much as I possibly can. I bring on the coolest musicians, some of the hottest names in the industry, even some up-and-comers that I firmly believe that you guys should pay attention to. I think the importance is to have conversations that inspire us to be better, that inspire us to pursue our passion on a daily basis. And if I can help one of you just do that, then I know I did my job. So definitely stay tuned, because I have lots of good interviews coming your way.